can fail. So damned if you do, and damned if you don't. So I told him, let's just go. We took that decision, just the two of us. We went to cabinet. He moved the decision that we are going to market that weekend. I seconded him in cabinet. Miraculously, the president said, I am not sure you guys know what you are saying, but anyway, let us give you guys the benefit of doubt. So we went on that weekend of January of 2024 to the Eurobond market to refinance our Eurobond. And it was oversubscribed by 3 times. As a result, our exchange rate came from 169 to where it is now. Sometimes when I'm traveling abroad nowadays, somebody asks me, why do you people fix your interest rate? I thought Kenya is a very liberal country. And I had to come and check with the governor of Central Bank whether actually Kenya fixes high interest rate. What they call fixing is because we've been stable, not moved by 1 percentage point for now 3 years and almost 3 years in a row, 2 years and a half. Since January of 2024, we've not, it is 130, 129, sometimes 128 or thereabout. And for me, that is nothing but, this is why I call managing our national funds, our national treasury. Sometimes it's a thankless job because people don't see that. You know, people don't see, it is like the job of becoming an anti-terrorism chief in some countries. Nobody appreciates you until it happens. In normal times, people think that's a default. So to many people, they may not know where we are coming from, but that's not what I'm talking about. My whole point is that the background to this conversation, you have to appreciate where we are coming from the financial perspective, from the global economy perspective. The second point, in terms of that history, is on the political front. Every other country in Europe, even now in the US, has gone from left, center of left, and you are the ambassadors, you know that better than me, to the far right. And for me, that is very worrying for Africa. I just hope now 2 things don't happen. If today, God forbid, there is a major war in Africa, we are on our own. We are on our own. If today there's a major epidemic in Africa, we are on our own. I just hope there's no other Ebola or some other, something. Because with the current kind of conservative far-right governments we have in the West, and that is, I have some sense of trepidation when I think about the election next year in our own country, hoping that we manage things ourselves. Because we don't manage it ourselves, those guys can say we can go to hell, we can butcher each other, we can, they wouldn't care less, because the demand for, ethno-nationalist thinking in Europe, in US, is just the mood is not there. And we are going to see, we are seeing that in many areas, the anti-immigration policies in Europe. Simply put, the global West and the global North has moved far right in a way whereby Africa has to trend very carefully because, in most cases, we are on our own. So having given that background in terms of where the world has come from, both from an economic point of view and from socio-political point of view, let me now delve into the reason I was invited here to talk about my experience, first of all, from a parliamentary practice and also on economic diplomacy. I will start with parliamentary practice for a very good reason. There's nothing much to write about it. There's nothing much to write about it. For me, my 10 years in parliament, if I'm asked what is that one word that defines how our parliament approaches our foreign policy, is that we are not there. We are not there. Parliament is people who pass laws, people who approve treaties, people who approve your budgets. They don't have any idea about our foreign policy, about our foreign interest, and about and it's not their fault. So, PS, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for intergovernmental collaboration between the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Parliament, if only to educate and to sensitize members of Parliament about how a Parliament should approach, our foreign policy, because they are important. It is very important, not just from the Committee of Defense, Intelligence, and Foreign Relations, but actually in all parliamentary business and parliamentary committees, because whatever we do here has to have a bearing, and I think we need to really look for a ways for the executive and the legislature to close the knowledge gap that exists between the two, and that manifests itself in other ways. Let me give you an example of how it manifests itself. One, to be honest with you, and nobody has paid me here, I really pity our diplomats. I really pity our diplomats. Because as a Minister for Trade, I traveled to I visited most of these people, many of their capitals. The underfunding is just impossible. It makes no wonder that our other investment in our foreign policy, our foreign ambitions are this much high. Our matching of that with the resourcing is pathetically low. And we need to look for ways of bridging the gap between our ambitions and funding. And by the way, let me go back to when I was minister in charge of delivery, in 2024, and I was sitting with PS here and the team from Foreign Affairs. One of the things that struck me, can you imagine, during those days when we were really being tortured and hammered by unfavorable exchange rates, you find an embassy has budgeted using the foreign exchange that was prevailing before. And then all of a sudden, the exchange losses wipe out everything. And I was very sympathetic, and I remember speaking in cabinet and telling cabinet, we really need to actually, and I really, PS, I really hope you can really take this forward. We need to lobby for a budget line in the budget of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs called foreign exchange losses. It needs to be budgeted for. Because it will happen. And it will not happen because of something that is of your own making. It will happen because of the global dynamics. But when it comes that you have to compete in a foreign embassy between buying tissue paper and paying for exchange losses, this is very unfair. In my opinion, we are not being serious as a country, and something we have to look after. So count it that I think that Parliament, and we have got a lot of ex-parliamentarians here now. I hope now, if they go back to Parliament, they'll be wiser and better. In terms of how you approach this one. But more than that, my tragedy of my 10 years in Parliament is, what is foreign policy to parliamentarians in absence of knowledge of what is in our interest? Foreign service and foreign policy is very important for MPs. Very important. Because they account for 70% of the squabbling we have in Parliament when people are denied foreign visits. It's a source, so it's very important. You find people who don't even talk to each other because my chairman has not given me, I'm the only one who has not gone for a trip. That is the only nexus between Parliament and foreign service. The number of trips I have gone for, the number of denials. And I think, if we have to be a serious country, especially a country of our, geopolitical strategic positioning as Kenya, we need to have a different conversation than trips. I remember one time I was the leader of delegation as a vice chair of the transport committee in Parliament. And I went to Nashville in Tennessee for a conference. And I was the head of the delegation, and I had some members of Parliament I can say it comfortably because none of my colleagues who are found here were with me, so I can talk a little bit freely. And I tried to gather my members, me being the leader. We sit down and agree what is our common position as members of parliament on this issue of urbanization in that conference in the evening. And I was told, if you want us to have a meeting, you have to come to where we are. You know where we were? We accompanied one member who was going to buy a dress for his wife. And that's where when we were pushing the trolley, is where we had to discuss our position on urbanization. I'm not being too harsh on my colleagues, but you know, that is the way it is. That's the way it is. You know, we need a different conversation, and we need a conversation based on where we agree. I hope the next gathering like this, we can get all the members, all the leadership of the different committees in Parliament, and to talk to these diplomats so that they can get to understand and to appreciate more that actually our foreign service, our foreign policy is an extension of our national policy and our national interests. So that gap, really, in my opinion, needs to be filled. Now, moving to economic diplomacy, an area which I'm much more comfortable. Again, I think, first of all, to look at things from the positive side, we've made a lot of progress. Just from the time that I was reading our economic diplomacy, I can count with this. Starting from the US, when President Biden took over from the first President Trump, you remember Uhuru Kenyatta went to the US in 2018, and he was received by President Trump. And there in that meeting, they agreed to start. President Trump is not a fan of multilateralism. He called it groupies, and you all know that. It's common knowledge. I mean, to him, it's groupies. And so therefore, he was more concerned about bilateral deals between countries, yeah, as opposed to this group formation. That particular time, as it is now, as it is, I think, in the foreseeable future, the only time African countries would get together is when we want the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, to be extended. Yeah, it is the only time we will speak together. Even people who are fighting, that time they would find a reason to work together. And it's always a very sensitive period when AGOA is expiring, like it's expired last year, and it's just been extended. I don't know for how long it's going to be extended. And of course, the black lobby within the Congress, and everybody is asking themselves, as trade ministers, I remember we could call each other and say, who do you know? Who in Congress do you know? Who do you know? I remember that time my first call would be to my good friend, the Secretary General of AFCFTA, Wamkele Mene. We give him some countries. Ibrahim Patel, the then Minister for Trade for South Africa. And we could map out members of Congress, members of the Ways and Means Committee, which was, very, 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 very powerful, trying to lobby for that. So Kenya, President Trump, and I really want to thank President Uhuru for that, because President Uhuru said, President Trump, you want a country to volunteer, may I say, to be the guinea pig of testing this bilateralism between US and Kenya is here. So we took our hands up and we started our free trade agreement between Kenya and the US. That was in 2018. 2020 is when now the discussion starts. Now in 2022, in 2020, President Trump is voted out, and here comes the Democrats. And the Democrats, they are for multilateralism, quote unquote, if I would call it that way. And again, they were in a fix. do we go back to this? What do we do with Kenya? It was a very tricky moment. What do we do with Kenya? We don't want this Trump's bilateralism. But at the same time, it's been started. Do we throw it away, or what do we do? And then they started saying, okay, we don't want to call it a free trade agreement because it's going to be seen like the Democrats are, rubber stamping Trump's bilateralism policies. So they went, and I think they looked for some people from the Bible Belt who are good in baptism names. And they called it the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership, STIP. And so they started the negotiation. And in 2022, now in Kenya, a new government comes in place. And I was named the trade minister, and my first task was to pick up on this tip issue. So again, someone, Ambassador Catherine Tai, who was the US trade representative, convinced me that I can be the blue-eyed boy if I move very quickly on this tip. But she was worried that, so I gave her my concern. I remember when I went to see her on the sidelines of the US African Forum in December of 2022, and I was hosted like an African prince, because they have found somebody who was ready to be the guinea pig. And of course, being a politician sometimes helps, because when we were now in a meeting room with all other Africans, because I was very vocal among the African ministers, I was giving them a lot of stories so that they can forget that I am going it solo, and that was being seen by some quarters to be betraying the rest of Africa. So I would get away from it by just doing some African storytelling, but of course they would gossip me behind my back and say, this one is the one who is selling us to those people by Kenya going it around. And it's always been very tricky. That's why I was following with keen interest your discussion on multilateralism, because many a times we found ourselves, especially on economic diplomacy, I had to do some balancing act between Kenya's interest and either multilateral African interest, that is on the issue of AGOA vis-a-vis STIP, but even more pointedly with our neighbors within our largest trading partners, the East African community. Now, if you don't know, and this is important for diplomats from EAC who are here, Kenya is the only country within the EAC. I don't know about Comesa, Egypt is there, so let's stick to EAC. Kenya is the only country within EAC which has attained a middle income status. The only country. So, for us, once you become middle income status, you lose a lot of concessions. A lot of concessions. Because that's where the Tajiri. Why do you need to be supported? So imagine now Kenya being called Tajiri. That's why you are suffering from that one. So, but for our neighbors, whether you do a deal or no deal, because of the least developed country status, automatically, whether you are a dictatorial regime, whatever you are, the benefits of LDC, they step in, so you are disadvantaged. So first of all, our neighbors had no incentive to negotiate deals, because in any case, there's a free lunch for them, the dividends of poverty, which they are reaping from, and we are being punished just by being who we are in terms of our economic status. So I had to make that decision, and I'm grateful to President Ruto, my boss, because he backed me up on all of those. I remember when we started, I'll give several instances how this affected us. One was Brexit. Brexit was a very trying moment for us, because, the UK is a very important trading partner for us. Without the UK, we don't have flowers. We don't have horticulture. A lot of our, traditional markets, when the UK coughs, Kenyan economy get a code, because of, traditional ties that we've had with them. Now Brexit has happened, and within no time, we need to have some holding arrangement for Kenya. Because now it's not, the old European architecture cannot help us. So luckily, we tried, concluded the BTA, the bilateral trade agreement with the UK, and I remember going to, in March of 2023, when I met the current leader of the Conservatives, leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch. And the only thing that helped us was that Kemi is originally from Nigeria. So she was much more sympathetic to me. And somehow with Barozi Manoa Esipisu, we were able to configure some sort of an arrangement that was holding, that helped us to mitigate the effects of Brexit. And still it wasn't easy. Can you imagine if you don't fly directly to Heathrow, for example, and you have to fly by connecting flight. Let's say it is our flowers. Our flies fly to Amsterdam. And then from Amsterdam, you use trucks. And then you have to get to the UK through, for example, Scotland, for example. And you find these queues for customs, coming from Netherlands to the UK, and there's a custom queue. So it's really a very trying moment, trying to, balance, the effects, to mitigate the effects of Brexit on Kenyan economy. But that was not the problem. The bigger problem was here. I go to the EAC, first agenda number one, our good friends, I will not name them, because also they don't name us. They call us Inchi Jirani Furani. So, Inchi Jirani Furani has already put a case against us for, because of, we have negotiated alone. How can you go without the rest of the EAC? So they put a case in the EAC, and I stood my ground. And I said, look, you guys, you have no incentive to negotiate. With or without a post-Brexit deal, you already have the advantages because of your LDC. So these effects, this dividends of poverty thing, started biting us, from that point of view. The case is still alive in the East African Court of Justice. Second thing is COMESA. Yeah. Second thing is on COMESA. And for COMESA, no, not COMESA, this European Union. Again, I found an agreement that was stalled for 7 years. And I remember I sat with the current EU ambassador, who is still around, and we agreed that we are going to finalize it. Whatever had taken 7 years, the economic partnership agreement, whatever had taken 7 years, took actually 1 year to conclude. And again, we will get into problems with the East African community. Same thing when we went to UAE, and we were negotiating the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Again, the same level of problems that were there. But despite all that, and amidst all the discomfort of all those difficulties, we managed to conclude the EPA with the UK, the EPA with the EU, the BTA with the UK, CEPA with UAE, and we are moving on. I'm very happy that now, I don't know if my good friend Ambassador Willy Bet is here, another landmark, yes, Barozi Pongezi, because now, just this year, we have concluded the one with China. Even as we are happy for that, I don't know why it has taken us for so long. What I really would want to advise is that there are some countries that I don't understand why we don't have, some sort of a framework. And some of them, for me, are very urgent. I'm very happy. China, I've always complained about China, and the speed is taken. But the other big one is India. India. I was sitting next to the deputy ambassador to India. Barozi, India is very, very urgent, especially because it's affecting us on areas such as avocados and all that. I think if you add now India, and now you can see because of what's happening within the Middle East and the Gulf War, I think India should be, in my opinion, the next country where we need to have a regime. And to that list also, South Korea. I know the ambassador is here. I have talked to her severally about the need also to fast track. We had started in South Korea and then somehow we lost him. So I can go on and on and on, but I think we've done some progress there. Let me mention about the TFTA, the Tripartite Free Trade Agreement that President Ruto, and thank you PS for facilitating me. It is the only time in my life, first of all, I visited 15 capitals, from President Sisi, President Ramaphosa, and the PS here was very facilitative. Why was it important? You will take a country like Tanzania. Tanzania is a member of COMESA and a member of EAC. No, they are not a member of COMESA. They are a member of EAC and SADC. Uganda is COMESA, EAC, and COMESA and EAC. So you find all these sort of algorithms. And I think PS, you know what, I was motivated by two things. One, if you wanted to trade, avocados in South Africa, Kenyan avocados are attracting 27% duty. Avocados in South Africa. When I told my good friend, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competitiveness, Ibrahim Patel, why can't we just agree? And President Ramaphosa came here, and he had a state visit here, visiting President Ruto. And we agreed on paper, we do something on a bilateral level, only for us to realize that if Kenya and South Africa would have done something on a bilateral level, China and India would have invoked MFN, the most favored nation status, and then that would put South Africa in trouble. So I realized I have two options. Either I wait for the full ratification of AFCFTA, and that means I wait for Libya to come from its issues and those other countries, or I look for a shortcut. Second thing, under something called the Guided Trade Initiative of the AFCFTA, we realized we had 7-8 countries. That's like a pilot, like a small crab to pilot AFCFTA. So Kenya was in that pilot alongside Ghana. And we tried, President Ruto flagged off the first container of tea from a company known as Melvin Tea in October of 2022 to Ghana, under this Guided Trade Initiative. The tea arrived very safe in March of 2023. March of 2023. Because of pure logistics. And I said, wait a minute. Even if, I'm a Pan-Africanist, but I'm also a realist. Even if we were to achieve full ratification of AFCFTA, would it solve the issue of logistics, the issue of infrastructure, the issue that we have to go all the way to the other side of Atlantic to deliver our tea? That's when I decided the best thing is to actually do some small temporary partition of Africa along the longitudinal line of the East and West. And I did realize then that SADC, EAC, COMESA, we are all on the east of the longitudinal line. And I said, let me create this one for ourselves. Maybe it can be a holding for that. That's when I went to the president and the PS facilitated. When you visit countries as envoy, you are not I was not a minister. So I was actually going as a president. That's why I'm not excited about being president, because I was a president for a whole 2 months. I remember in Angola, President Lourenco sent his own personal car to come and pick me up from there. So wale ambao wanakuwa excited ya kuwa rais, nishakuwa rais. So it's not a big deal. But as a result, I remember when I saw PS in Addis Ababa, when we got the final signature. That time I was not a minister anymore. But you can imagine the joy I had when PS I saw in Addis Ababa signing the TFTA, and that brought the 28 countries together. Now, 28 is a very important number, because 28 is one more than EU. EU is 27. So if this TFTA can be taken advantage of. We have a trading bloc that is one country more than TFTA. Sorry, Barozi, I'm just finishing. And he's Barozi Orina, not Irina or Arina. Now I've bribed you, sit down, by getting your name, by getting your name right, but I've worked a lot with him. Now, where do we go from here? As I summarize, where do we go from here? The first thing, PS, that really I would really want, first of all, to speak for these people. I've talked about budgets, but the other thing that really I would really do whatever is possible within my means and influence is on the issue of communication. More than money, more than lack of sugar and fuel that these people go through, the bigger problem they have is communication. They write letters. Letters come to MFA. It goes to somebody there in some ministry who does not respond. And I want to speak for these people because it's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. When Waziri, I came, I wrote letters. I remember I went to Mozambique and I met the former ambassador, Paul Ndungu. And he told me that all he has done until President Ruto went to visit, from the time he landed in Maputo, is write letters. So if, in my opinion, we could have a desk in MFA whose job is to follow up with the ministries, to respond to letters from these diplomats, I think that can help, because there's nothing more frustrating than being in a country and then you are not being effective because information is not coming through. The second thing is preparedness. We need to have, by the time somebody leaves Kenya to serve in a foreign mission, we should have a summary of what is in our interest in that country. Most of the time, these people go out there and they have to do their own discovery. They have to discover, it's what I would call white cane diplomacy. I remember I tried to solve this when I was Minister for Trade. I created a booklet because when I went to some few countries, and that booklet is there, PS, I'm going to give it to you and Foreign Affairs, of the top 50 export destinations for Kenya and what can be achieved. It has not been used by anybody since I created it in 2023. I actually was looking at it as I come, because we need to be deliberate and we need to be scientific and guided by what is possible and what is doable in our interest. Finally, is on the issue of diversification of our interests. As I've said, we are living in a world whereby the financial system is broken. The financial system is unfair. And it's really incumbent upon us to look at other things, other ways of doing things. Diversify trade, diversify investment, look at new markets. I am privileged. I'm assisting the National Treasury right now. Kenya went back to the Eurobond market only 1 month ago, just before the war, we wanted $2 billion US dollars, and we managed to raise $4.5 billion. The bids were for $4.5 billion. We ended up taking $2.25 billion, but from Eurobond. And because this issue is going to persist, I actually spoke to PS National Treasury to look, you must smell the coffee now. And I'm proud to say that I'm assisting and working with the PS for National Treasury. By first week in the new financial year, Kenya is going to issue its first Islamic bond, Sukuk, so that we can be able to diversify and look at different things, because this over-dependence on some few areas, given our financial, yes, the world is unfair. Question is, what are we going to do? What are we doing ourselves to help ourselves, to get out of that situation? Finally let me just mention something about an area I know very well, the Gulf and what's happening there. Guys, I am a peaceful man, and I think all of you know that. But sometimes war has got some flip side effects, from investment, from trade, from tourism. I don't want to be quoted, because sometimes I get into problems for being quoted. But sometimes when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Let us smell the coffee and do something meaningful for our country that can come from the students preparing there. Thank you very much, everybody. And sorry, Barozi.
Thank you very much. Thank you. As I say, 3 things. Ambassador Matwanga, please be approaching so that you can give a vote of thanks. We've listened to Honorable Moses Kuria. Let's give him a round of applause. Very eloquent, very eloquent. He knows his subject. What has he told us? He's told us that the global economic environment has been extremely harsh for developing countries. That includes Kenya. Second, that Kenya has not defaulted. It's not out of fluke. It's out of hard work by technocrats, you and I included. A round of applause. He has also told us that the conservative far right is on the ascendance in traditional partners of Africa in the global north. And because of that, Africa is on its own. Can you frown on that? On parliamentary diplomacy, he has said a lot of things. Bottom line, there is a knowledge gap that needs to be bridged, and the onus is on us to bridge that knowledge gap, because only then can Parliament support the Foreign Service. Finally, on economic diplomacy, he's taken us through the journey from 2018, at least from 2018 up to where we are today. What has Kenya done? Concluded a number of EPAs with many strategic partners. These are supporting us in the pursuit of our economic interests. That's what Honorable Moses Kuria said, and indeed he has invited you to smell the coffee and make lemonade out of the lemon that you've been given. Balozi Frederick Lusambili Matwanga, one of the New York mafias like me. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Orina. My assignment is very brief and very straight, to pass a vote of thanks.